What's up, you saucy devils? It's your boy Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you from in quarantine, recording on a Sunday afternoon because I've lost track of days and I'm going slightly mad. What have we got to talk about? I mean, John Jones has made an arse of himself again. There's continuing speculation over UFC 249 and, Ashley Evans Smith? Lee? I think there's a Lee. That girl with the big ass, she stole some medical supplies and then went on Ariel's show and defended it. That's about it, to be honest. That's about it for news. I mean, we're just in this weird spot, really, where, nothing can be booked, really, because everywhere is in some form of quarantine. Everywhere is in some form of limiting public gatherings. And fighting continues to be the weirdest sport on earth. And it's always, I was talking to my wife about this at the beginning of the economic downturn. This is a money program now. But I said, jokingly, babe, you know what? Fighting is recession-proof. The Great Depression, one of the biggest benefiters from the Great Depression was Tex Rickard and the game of boxing at the time. People love a good fist fight when they've got no money. Also, people are more willing to get involved in fist fighting when they've got no money. However, that's sort of like propped up by bookies because the only reason the sport exists. I mean, to be fair, you can hold it as like a spectator sport, but most of the reason that professional sports exist is because of gambling. And if you look into the history of that, it's absolutely great. I wrote a piece for Battles of London about the Marquess of Queensberry and the one who had the disagreement with Oscar Wilde and who wrote the first rules for... wrote the rules that differentiated boxing from pugilism. The Queensberry rules. Queensberry rules, I'll take him tonight, famously Mike Tyson said to Bob Sapp. But his grandfather, the original Queensberry, Old Q, he used to make all kinds of weird bets because, professional sports were in their youth back then, and it was basically professional sports exist so that rich dudes could have something to bet on that wasn't like, I'm going to have my footman jump off the top of this building. If he survives, you win. So on the one hand, fighting, people will always be interested. On the other hand, if you can't bet and you have no money to bet, kind of hurts. Especially as I write a lot of pieces for Unibet. But then you got fighters all over the spectrum on this. You got it's very interesting because like people keep announcing fights for like Aljamain Sterling was the one that comes to mind. He came out afterwards and was like, "No, I haven't signed a fight. I literally have nowhere to train. Would I sign a fight when I can't train?" All the big gyms are closed down. You've got some guys like the Danaher Death Squad are being very douchey about it. And they're doing it in small... I think they're doing it in small groups. They're training with like guys they know. But equally, you're in New York, So and most of them live outside of New York. So you're traveling in, you're sweating all over other dudes, and then you're going back out. Then you got geniuses like Sam Alvey, who came out a couple of weeks... No, I think it was a week or two ago. And he was like... I wish the whole country would just get over coronavirus. I think it's kind of embarrassing that they already haven't. Because Sam Alvey will say whatever the worst thing is possible at any given time. Assemble the MMA Brain Trust, Sam Alvey and Cody Garbrandt. Maybe Tito Ortiz in there as the scribe to write down their official documents. But Dominic Reyes came out this week too, and he was like, I'm well in favour of how Dana White's handling everything. And by handling everything, he means I'm well in favour of Dana White trying to keep going with this fight and assemble people from all over the world and their teams in a room and then send them back to their home countries afterwards. And that's the pickle that you've got here. Like, even if they do something really cool, like they have the fight on the tanker that I already suggested, I feel like the problem is where the fight ends and then they go, okay, everyone, back to your home countries, because then you've just sort of pissed all over the idea of quarantine in the first place, or lockdown, as we are in Britain at the moment. But then they're not going to be allowed to do that. I mean, it was great watching yesterday as people were saying, like, yeah, Russia's closing the flights in 2 hours, and apparently Habib's still in Russia. You're going, oh yes, this sport is just a mess. So Dana White's running around putting out fires and trying to book UFC 249. The rumours so far have been South Korea, because they've already they're on the downward trend of their corona outbreak, hopefully, somewhere on an Indian reservation, which at that point you are literally worse than Scott Coker. As I said on a tweet the other day, like, it's easy to not be Scott Coker when times are good. It's whether you can not be Scott Coker when times are rough that tells us how much of a not Scott Coker person you are. Japan was rumoured briefly, because I know that they've got a... they're not doing... from what I've heard, they're not doing as much as like the UK and people like and other countries that are doing a proper lockdown, but they have suspiciously low or surprisingly low cases. So they might also be in the downward curve as well. I think no matter how it goes, it's going to end up looking really skeevy, is how I'd describe it. But, you know, I think there's a lot of us who are in the camp that booking Tony Habib for the fourth time is what started coronavirus, so we just got to plough through and get it done. And whoever wins the lightweight belt can be the best lightweight in the Neo world, whatever's left of it. But I put out the call today because I was like, what do you want to talk about? We're getting dangerously close to this just being a podcast about Tiger King. If you haven't seen Tiger King, it couldn't have dropped at a better time. I feel like maybe the boys at Netflix were sitting on that and the new season of Ozark and just going, well, if things get bad, we can always drop the Tiger King. It's so good. And I knew the guy. I knew Joe Exotic, from, not personally, obviously, but I knew him from an old Louis Theroux documentary. If you've never seen the Louis Theroux documentaries, they're brilliant. He's an English guy who goes to like hang out with Nazis or anyone, basically, and he just sits there and goes, oh, and lets them talk. And it's quite interesting because you get the human side of the Nazi. You know, you remember that these are just people who have adopted heinous views for a reason. You know, something's happened to them, or they had a relative who believed it very strongly. And you also get he gives them enough rope to just make themselves look really stupid and hang themselves with, which is always great. And he's just lovely. Yeah, he just has a cup of tea with whoever. So if you've not seen those, I think they're on Netflix. They're on Netflix UK at least. They might be on the BBC Worldwide service. But he had Joe Exotic on years ago when he did a thing about buying exotic pets in the US. And it was a bit much then, and it's only got worse. But Tiger King, watch it. Brilliant. What else did I watch? I haven't gone back to Kengan Ashura or Baki. What I said was Kengan Ashura, a lot like Baki, but not enough sex between minors. And oh my god, I watched the first episode of that Beastars, which is, as soon as you get into it, you're like, oh fuck, this is a furry program, turn that off. But I bombed through Tiger King, and I'm just going through Ozark now, and the days are just, whoa, like they're all over the place. I have no idea what time it is or what day it is. But I have been working very hard on a Gary Tonin versus Huzamar Palhares, or Huzamar? He's the Mar. Palhares study, which is another in the series absolute masterclass. The first one was the Cody Garbrandt versus Dominic Cruz one. If you haven't read that, great fun. So what I'm saying is, let's do some of these questions, or what people ask me to talk about. Link says, not formulated as a question, but the rush of people seeking to diagnose JJ as having addiction problems without... Okay, I thought Joanne and Jay checked there. I was like, what did I miss? John Jones as having addiction problems without him admitting to it and seeking treatment himself. Don't do anybody any favours, because it just exempts him from personal responsibility, i.e. you don't tell a sick... Next tweet. I.e. you don't tell a sick person to get their fucking act together, but for addicts that's essentially the cure. It just enables further addictive behaviour. I think John Jones' main addiction is to being a dickhead, and that's what he needs to sort out first and foremost. He did at one point go to rehab. He went in and then he came out 12 hours later and was like, I'm cured. It was when he was intending to be a nice guy. It was the phoniest bullshit you've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like, you can have addiction and you can want someone to get help if they have an addiction, but that doesn't mean you have to think that they're not a twat for acting like a twat. Tao says, Filthy Casual's guide on Fernando Terere. Oh, fucking Terere, whatever you want to call him. Absolute monster. If you've never seen Terere, well, this is how, like, before I really knew much about how good Matt Serra was as a grappler. You know, I followed him in MMA, but I didn't know how legit he was as a grappler. I saw him in, I think it was ADCC, or it might have just been a no-gi comp, but it was against Terere, and he beat him. And I was like, fucking hell, okay, Matt Serra is legit. Because Terere, he basically created a lot of the dynamic passing game you see now. A lot of stuff he just sort of popularized or semi-invented. Him and Marcelo, like similar sort of times, both making huge strides, just seeing what worked basically. And also a really crafty dude. And if you watch the match, he went up. He had some beef with Verdum, and Verdum was in like ultra heavy in the gi or whatever it was, and Terere was either middle heavy or middleweight or something like that. But he went up like 2 weight classes to just squash his beef with Verdum, and they're doing a stare down before it, which is weird. But Terere's rubbing his hands, and the crowd are going mental. I've never seen anything like it for a jiu-jitsu competition. But Terere, like, long steps, that's a Terere thing. All the, like, running around to people's backs as they turn to their knees. He was just so dynamic. And, he used to do things like put his foot forward and give when the opponent's seated guard, he'd put his foot forward, whip it away, do the magic stick and leap over their head. Just an awesome, awesome grappler. And again, like on the subject of addiction from the previous question, Terere's career went off the rails because he got addicted to, I think it was cocaine, or crack rather, and he was in a really bad place. You'd get like he disappeared for a few years, and there were like occasional updates from Brazilian black belts and things just saying, I just ran into my friend Terere on the street. He's homeless now. I just can't believe that this is the guy who dominated all those competitions, who taught me so much. Because he was also like a big part. It was him, Teles, Vieira. They trained a ton of guys, and most of the top guys, their lineage goes back to them somehow, from Brazil at least. But yeah, he got healthy, and now I think he talks about having favela jiu-jitsu, which is a great name for your style, but I think he actually does have a gym in the favelas, or in the rougher parts of major Brazilian city, kind of like Andre Pederneiras. He produced like 30 Vale Tudo or MMA champions or whatever it was, and he did it out of the favelas, which is pretty cool because you think about like boxing gyms being in rougher areas of England and the US, and people fighting their way out of poverty. Having a guy like Andre Pederneiras there is such an advantage if you're coming up. Dave said JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What do you think about Nestle's human rights abuses? Bunch of cunts. You could talk about Gordon Ryan's efforts to spread the virus by continuing to train. The Danaher Death Squad guys are being so meat-headed about this. I mean, like I said, you could train in small numbers and things and talk about like rule of averages or whatever, but I think my friend Stephen Rondina had a great take on this when someone was saying, why can't I go to the gym and train? It was a major fight, I can't remember who it was, but it was Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock was taking a dozen more L's on his record this week, just being like, the cure can't be worse than whatever it was, the Trump line, the cure can't be worse than the cause or whatever. And Ken Shamrock was saying, let us go back to work. And Stephen Rondina said, quite rightly, I had a car crash once, but you can't bring that home to your wife and your elder relatives. I mean, basically going on like that, it's just like, for anyone who is in lockdown or quarantine or anything else in another major country, you're just sort of like shitting on their efforts to prevent the exponential spread of this illness. James says, thoughts on Oliveira's use of the Reap? Specifically the other week against Kevin Lee. It looked like it caused a real dilemma for Lee. To me, it looked like he had to be extra cautious how he moved, and it kept Oliveira out of striking range most of the time. And he's got some clips of him on the floor. I think it's that one where he went from like the Y guard to reaping over the top of the leg to like the saddle inside Sankaku, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, leg entanglements are really working well for Oliveira. We talked about it last week, I think, and he does some really good stuff from there. And I think I was watching some 2019 ADCC just because there's fuck all else to do, just because there's fuck all else going on. I was catching up on Dante Leon, who was a young upstart who did really well this year. Did an amazing back take on Gary Tonnen out of a heel hook attempt. Someone pointed out on Reddit, when I was going back through the threads at the time, just seeing how people reacted to Dante Leon upsetting Lucas Lepre. Someone pointed out that Keenan had already said, and it has been saying for a while, In no-gi, it's half guard, single legs, and leg entanglements, and those are the only things that matter from the bottom. And it is the case, and you see that in MMA too. Coming up on the single, Damian Maia's whole game, known as one of the best bottom players in the game, and half the time it's just him coming up on the single. He'll throw up the odd triangle, and he'll threaten you from the bottom. If you get stuck in closed guard with Maia, he will do stuff. But if he gets stuck in closed guard and he doesn't have the favourable grips and you're not broken down and he's not able to throw up the triangle, as Oliveira did, he'll kick you out to a knee shield and put his own foot between your legs to come up on the single in half guard. Half guard, single legs, leg entanglements. Those are the only things that anyone should be bothering to work right now, and everything else is just extra. Sub says, rank martial arts communities by level of stupidity. Gotta stir the pot. Oh, I mean, it's one thing to pick on traditional martial arts who are just delusional, but I think the level of delusion in like a subset of BJJ people is probably the worst, because you've come to BJJ because you saw like the Gracie challenges or the UFC or whatever, and you're going, well, yeah, those martial arts don't work. This martial art does work. And then you get stuck in that and you start having these bollocks ideas that everything was already perfect and any new development is worse. And there's people complaining about like gi jiu-jitsu being like, and I complain about gi jiu-jitsu too, I don't find it tremendously entertaining, but people being like, this isn't what Helio wanted. You're like, well, Helio didn't want leg locks, and Helio wanted to sit in closed guard for 40 minutes trying to cross-choke you. Just insane. Like, these people haven't ever seen a Helio Gracie match, and they're still like, oh, this is what Helio believed. This doesn't pass the Helio filter, and I include his weird-ass nephews in that too. Or grandchildren, whatever they are. Fed says, Gordon Ryan, I think we've already touched on that. The games you're playing on the Switch, your plan for defeating the horde of moronic panic buyers, and how quickly you're getting on Mrs. Slack's nerves while in self-isolation. Well, I was laying on the floor of the living room the other day watching TV, and she was walking through, and every time she walked through, I'd hook myself on with De La Hiva and be like, drag me with you. And she was not enjoying that at all. I was like, I need sweaty men to wrestle with. Defeating panic buyers, really, I just go in and I go, what can I buy? And to be fair, it's getting better. They're doing a better job now. They're restocking all the shelves. The thing is, like, I was listening to Radio 4 the other day, and they had some Tory bastard, I can't remember his name. He was like the Secretary of State, I don't know. He had an official cabinet role, and the interviewer kept asking him, so when's the food going to run out? And this guy kept going, no, there's food. There's food in warehouses. It's just that it's not on the shelves because people keep fucking buying it all. And they asked him about 9 times, and I was siding with this ghastly Tory because, like, if you've answered it that many times, and we all know, like, there's warehouses full of toilet roll in the UK. Stop buying all the toilet roll. And Switch games, I haven't actually played the Switch in a while. I've broken out the PS4, and I was playing Horizon Zero Dawn, because I got that dead cheap ages ago. And you know how, like, you just pile up things when they're on sale? I mean, if you only buy things on sale, like a cheap bastard like me, that's how you get them. And I played it, like, a little bit. It was kind of like when I first played The Witcher 3. I'd also got Metal Gear Solid 5. And I played a little bit of The Witcher, and I was like, what the fuck is this? This doesn't appeal to me. And then I came back to it later, and I was like, oh, I love this. There's so much depth to the systems and shit. And I'm finding that with Horizon Zero Dawn. I thought it was really shit the first time I played it, and I put it down. And now I'm finding all the little, like, ways you can hunt the big dinosaurs and shit. It's really good fun. And, of course, Persona 5 The Royale is coming out later in the week, which is my one weeb thing that I do enjoy. I had a lot of fun playing Persona 5. Never played any of the previous Personas, but that is an unbelievably stylish and polished product, Persona 5. Persona 5 is like, I look at that and I go, I need to make some kind of creative, what are they called, design palette for the Filthy Casuals guides, and actually start setting up, colour schemes, transitions, titles, shit like that. And then I go, oh, that's a lot of hard work. I give up. Unnecessary stock pip asks for scandalous rumours and obvious bullshit. I think I did that the other week when I was like, I know at least 3 UFC champions who were gay, or no, I know 3 people who have been UFC champions who are gay. Had to get people wondering. Hop over to the Facebook to see what people are asking for there. Need a full Tiger King breakdown. I think I did my best there. Which was better in hindsight, WEC or Pride? Also, why is it WEC? I was a Pride Never Die boy for a little while, and now 13 years removed from it, I'm kind of like, lads, come on, move on. But the WEC was also great. They're both really good products. I think the WEC, it ran a little bit later, and you had less sort of freak fights and mismatches. In fact, the WEC was kind of like really, really good guys competing for almost no money. And it's kind of like, I was watching the BJJ Kumite, which was Lloyd Irvin. He did a tournament of like the world's best brown belts, and if you read like what you had to do to get in and what the prize was, it was shit. So these guys were just there because they wanted to fight Keenan Cornelius, and they wanted to make a name for themselves. And you're going, yeah, that's an awesome lineup and an awesome tournament, and the matches that came out of it were incredible. But you're also like, we couldn't do that again today. You've got to fucking pay these guys. And I feel like the WEC is kind of like that. You had just guys who should have been stars, but they were in a minor promotion because of the weights. Lightweight, there were a fair few, but to be fair, lightweight until very recently, people forget, like the UFC didn't give a shit about that either. They brought that back with Sean Shirk. They cut that in a very simple. This is why I thought they were going to cut flyweight. I thought that Benavidez Figueiredo fight was the death knell for flyweight when that happened, because it was such an undecisive result with the missing weight, so no one actually gets the belt. And it just reminded me of the last UFC lightweight fight before they cut the division, which was either Kaoluno Jens Pulver or Kaoluno BJ Penn, but they went to a draw, and so no one got the belt, and the UFC was like, oh fuck this, and they just left it. So WC had a heap of great lightweights, and they all went on to do well in the UFC. Donald Cerrone, Benson Henderson, a couple of them dropped off, like Jamie Varner. Though Jamie Varner had that awesome fight with Edson Barbosa. Anthony Pettis, of course. And for like 2 years, everyone was getting finished by guillotines, and people were like, the WEC guillotine. Like, they all meet up and they practice this technique to kill each other with. But it was a great time to be a fan, and Miguel Torres was so much fun. A young Dominic Cruz coming up the ranks was good fun too. I mean, Uriah Faber in his heyday was terrific. Mike Brown coming out of nowhere, and like I always pick on this one guy. I can't even remember who wrote it, but someone wrote on Sherdog before the Aldo Mike Brown fight. They were like, I think after this fight we will be even closer to considering Mike Brown the featherweight great of this generation. And if you look back at that, you go, fucking hell, that's way off base. But at the time, he'd just beaten Uriah Faber twice when Uriah Faber hadn't had trouble with anyone else. And, that could be a case of having someone's number. I mean, there were some weird circumstances around both, but no one else had beaten Uriah Faber by weird circumstances. And of course, Brownie went on to be one of the best head coaches in the sport. So, it's clearly a very knowledgeable, talented guy, but it was just so strange. Henry versus Valentina breakdown. Oh, seconds out, ding ding. I'm just kidding. He'd batter her. And Neruda asks, you could react to some Muay Thai. Sexton versus Superlek is a good one. And I responded to that. I'ma click that link, but there better not be any dumbass clarinet hooting in the background. And I clicked it and there was. That's my problem with Muay Thai. I could watch Muay Thai all day if it weren't for the fucking doodly flute. And also the way that decisions are rubbish. And then there's always some, whatever the Thai equivalent of a weeb is, popping up to go, oh, actually in Thailand, they value the third and fourth round higher than the fifth and the second. Or, oh, well, actually, it was cleaner kick technique. No, he didn't get anything done, but it did look nicer. Andreas asks, Conor versus Gaethje pressure versus pressure matchup. I mean, yeah, that's it. Like, to be fair, Gaethje, like, against Donald Cerrone, didn't really fight very pressury. And even against Barbosa, he backed him up a bit, but he still didn't back him up all the time. So I'm quite interested. I'd like to see Justin Gaethje fight for more than a minute. Is my current stance. I'm very interested to see what he's doing. I always thought that the Gaethje-McGregor matchup was one where if Gaethje could weather the storm, and it's weathering a storm where he's putting himself in the storm. At any time he could back up and remove himself from the storm, but if he weathers the storm going forward, he has the sort of style that could tire McGregor out. But he would have to, he's also putting himself in range to be hurt a lot of the time too, while coming forward. And of course he hasn't in recent fights got hurt much, but in the old fights he used to get wobbled coming in or coming down off one leg because he was kicking as his opponent was moving in. And then most of those guys couldn't finish him, but McGregor, or finished him later in the fight. But McGregor is the kind of guy that you don't want to get hurt once against, to be honest, unless you're Nate Diaz and you've got a concrete head and the guy's scared to jump into your guard. Nika says, an entire podcast about Wushu Watch. Oh, I'm working on it. I have a big folder of Systema stuff that I'm going through. I've been reading 2 books on Systema by Vlad, what's his name, Vladi? The one that's not Ryabko, not the big fat one, the one in Toronto. There's 2 guys who do Systema, and that's about it. But I'm reading his book, and it's very strange. It's very strange. I wanted to put up a photo of it the other day because it'll just say the crux of striking is, and then it'll give you an Old Testament quote, and you'll be like, you what now? It also says, also either next week or after that, go to Heavy Hands and the 3 of you should... Do they have an office? Go to Heavy Hands and the 3 of you should discuss the topic of fight analysis itself. I know that that's not the label you use for yourself, but still, how you approach it, why you like it, which fighters and coaches seem to be good at it, etc. One day I'll do Heavy Hands when they ask me. I got an interesting question actually related to this. A lot of people do this. They go like, what software do you use to analyze fights? I'm like, I don't. I use the grid from Photoshop. I place it over the fight footage and I do it in quadrants. It's just like, you just get used to watching stuff. That's how it works. And what you see is always going to be coloured by what you look for in fights anyway, or what it's going to be coloured a lot by what you value in sparring too, and things like that. So, when I'm looking at a fight, I never want to pretend that my view of it is the only view you can have. I'm just, stuff will stick out to me that doesn't stick out to other people, and stuff will stick out to them that doesn't stick out to me. And particularly as we're all learning all the time, I've been working really hard in the last couple of years on my understanding of wrestling and training more wrestling, and now I'm seeing more wrestling in fights, even though I wouldn't consider it my wheelhouse, but I'm just looking at it because I'm thinking about it all the time. Kyle says, do you think Prince Naseem would have done well against the fighters of the modern era, e.g. Pacquiao, Terence Crawford, Mayweather, Thurman? I think Prince Naseem had a lot of potential that was never realised, as much as he won 2 world titles, or 3. The best of Prince Naseem is like his fight with Steve Cunningham, where he went down to Wales and he's fighting southpaw orthodox, square on, side on, and then literally feet level at several points. He does everything in that fight, and Brendan Ingle points to that fight as like the best of his style. And then after that, he just gets mad about his punching power. It's so interesting because you can watch footage of him as like an amateur. They interviewed him when he was like a kid, he was just in his teens, and he goes, "Oh, I don't have a lot of punch, but I can move pretty well." And that was the worst fucking Sheffield accent ever. But he didn't consider himself a big puncher when he was like winning schoolboy titles, and then he found out he could hit really hard, and then he stopped boxing, basically. And he left Ingle, and he started working with Emmanuel Stewart. And Emmanuel Stewart, like, if you watch The Little Prince, The Big Fight, that's just a summary of fucking everything that can go wrong in a fight camp. He was just awful for that. Marco Antonio Barrera is training up on Big Bear, and he's training like an animal. And then they cut to Naz, and he's staying in Frank Sinatra's old villa and playing golf. And they've got Emmanuel Stewart in, and they've just done their first rounds of sparring for the fight. And Emmanuel Stewart is clearly trying not to say he's in terrible shape, and I'm really not looking forward to this camp. But, Emmanuel Stewart also, like, he coaches particular fighters in a particular style, and he wasn't going to get the best out of the weird-ass style that Naz had worked with had developed under Ingle. When they're so different like that, all Stewart could really do was give him pointers and a pep talk, really, in the corner. So do I think he'd do well against people like Mayweather and so on? I think it'd be interesting against someone like Mayweather because he's such a strange fighter. At his best, this is, where he was using 4 different stances, as Brendan Ingle always says, and was actually jabbing and using his jab to set up counter strikes. I think that'd be interesting. I think, obviously, you've got to bet on Floyd Mayweather because he's one of the greats of all time. But I think that there was a very short window where Naz was actually living up to his potential. I think everything, you can watch it. You can watch him fight, like, what's his name, Augie Sanchez, just not a great fighter, and Naz is just throwing the same one punch over and over again. That corkscrew uppercut, like he abandoned everything else and just threw the corkscrew uppercut all the time. Someone said Mads Bennell's boxing. Shout out to the Mads lads. Mads Bennell's coming back to the UFC. Well, he's not. He's signed with Dominance MMA, but they basically only deal with the UFC, so he's coming back to the UFC. Dean says, your tea-making technique and top 5 pound-for-pound biscuits to have with a cup of tea. Okay, ideally, you want to get your tea in the pot and you want to have it brew for an appropriate amount of time. I like a stronger brew, but that's because my wife and her family like a stronger brew. My family had a lot of milk in their tea. And I got a lot of shit for it, to be honest, when I married my wife. But always tea, then milk, then stir, but that is an optional step. Because there is tea you make for pleasure, and there is tea you make for necessity. And tea you make for necessity can often be tea bag in the mug, hot water, milk, leave it to just sort of mix itself up, take a spoon with you as you go back to the office, and then you can throw the tea bag into the bin several minutes later. Top 5 biscuits. Foxes do an amazing cookie that has like chocolate on the bottom of it. I love a Choco Leibniz. Oh, whatever they're called, Chocolate Leibniz. If you can find those, amazing. Custard cream is a banger. Bourbon biscuit. Do you know what? The king of biscuits is actually an Australian biscuit called a Tim Tam. And I think it's Australian because I basically can't get them over here anymore. But with the Tim Tam, what you do is a Tim Tam explosion, which is, it's like a rectangular biscuit. Think of like a Bourbon biscuit, but covered in a layer of chocolate. You nibble off one corner, and then you nibble off the opposite corner. So if you've done like top right, you do bottom left. And then you put the bottom corner in the tea and you suck it through the biscuit like a straw until the biscuit explodes in your hand and makes a mess, and then you have to shovel it into your mouth. That is the king of biscuits, but also not one you can do in polite company. Connor asks, politics? And I just go, oh, for fuck's sake. Everything's getting worse and has been since a while. And the best part of that is that either side of the spectrum, people will go, yeah, this guy's right. Pieter says, worst matchups for most complete human being, Valentina Shevchenko. What do you think about the current judging criteria of MMA, or current judging system of MMA? Future of no-gi grappling training in relation to gi training. Will they stick together or move apart? And best solo drills when in quarantine. I've been working a lot on my penetration steps because, got the garden, got some lawn. So been working on sweep singles, because I love a sweep single, and angled knee drop, which is something that Jeff Jordan stresses. He went back to, Graham High School? They call it Graham. Oh, could have got into that with graham crackers. It's Graham, for fuck's sake. But he went back to Graham High School and he produced an amazing team out of there with this head inside single where instead of like sweeping around the leg, you drop the knee in front of the leg and you pull the guy down onto his knees. And then you sort of like run around to the back as you would in a Lucas Lech style half guard sweep. And he really stresses the angled knee drop. So I've been working on that. You can always do cartwheels and handstands if you've got a bit of turf. Great fun. And good for the shoulders too. Got to get real jacked and juicy if you're going back. You don't want to go back just slightly fatter. You want to go back slightly fatter but with big shoulders. Because that's it's not the first thing women notice. It's the first thing dudes notice. They go, hey, shoulders looking good. What are you doing? It's like when Dyson Tebow returned from his exile after defeating Khabib Nurmagomedov. Came back with the biggest, juiciest shoulders you've ever seen. And I was like, damn, son. This guy's going to win this fight. And then he didn't. Lateral bases are still the best base for MMA. People just keep using the anomalous losses of fighters with big shoulders to disprove my theory. And I say they're anomalies. They prove the theory, if anything. Future no-gi and gi training, I think more legs. I mean, even a few years ago, like a lot of gyms in Britain, it was, I'm sure it was this way in America too. It was like, oh, there's the guy who does the heel hooks and he's a bit weird. There wasn't like the in-depth study of positions that there is now. And it's kind of like I'm doing some stuff on Pahara's at the moment, and his, it helps being beastly strong, but entries and finishes were all that really mattered. Well, entries basically were all that mattered on legs for a long time because there was sort of it wasn't as well studied as like every other position in jiu-jitsu. Whereas now, guys can live in the leg entanglements. They can work their way through, you know. Even in the last year or so, the level of the leg game has gone up and up and up. You're seeing less finishes because so many guys understand it better. Current judging system, it's not great, but I don't know what else you can do. It's a lot of effort to try and think of a better system, and I don't know if I could. I really don't think I could think of a better judging system. I think every judging system is... you can't break it down into just numbers and quantitative data. So there's always going to be a degree of opinion there, you know. Cornelius says, how good was Branko Sikotic? Just remembered Branko Sikotic passed away this week. Bit of a nutter, not going to lie. Very dirty fighter. If you watch his fight with... he fought like an old school kickboxing match against Don the Dragon. But he was a filthy cheat in that. And but he did win the very first K1 Grand Prix. And he knocked out Ernesto Hoost, who was like Mr. Pound for pound #1 in the world at the time. Knocked him out twice, just starched him outright. Just had this ungodly power in his right hand. And that, I mean, he's a big win on Andy Hoog's record, because Andy Hoog came into K1 with they were grooming him for stardom. They loved him. They'd shown a couple of his kickboxing matches, his karate matches even. And then they were like, okay, Andy's moving over to kickboxing. Had a couple of fights, did well. Lost to Patrick Smith, won against Patrick Smith in the rematch, and I think that was afterwards actually. No, but very early in his career he fought Branko Sikotic, and Branko Sikotic was still super legit, and he beat Branko Sikotic, and everyone was like, "Fucking hell, pay attention to this lad." A Wild Quarantine appeared, asks, "What kind of entrance would you have if you could have one in the UFC?" Shawn Michaels WrestleMania, whichever one he fought the Undertaker on, with the white garment and the sparklers and everything, or a Goldberg style one. I confess I took a break in the middle of recording this podcast, and in the time since I came back and answered a few more questions, Tony versus Khabib has been thrown into chaos even further. Apparently Khabib's stuck in Russia. Ali Abdulaziz is denying this, of course, and it's looking not great. So the thing that I was working on for the next podcast, which was going to be called Seasons of Tony and Khabib, might work, might not work. We'll see. At any rate, this was a weird one. I'll be finishing up my Tonnen versus Palhares study for the Patreon boys, and then I think I'll probably try and get a Filthy Casuals guide out this week, along with some other fight commentaries. I've got a couple in the bag. I just don't like to release them one at a time. I thought I'd rather do them in batches. So then some kind of Filthy Casuals guide, probably on a non-UFC fighter, just because I like to be able to keep the footage up without the UFC intern bugging me. And we'll carry on from there. So send your emails to the podcast, fightsgonepodcast@gmail.com. We could really use them. And we'll see what happens with UFC 249. I mean, the Endeavour are desperate for a quick cash grab, so I don't know if the UFC gets Tony versus Gaethje, or they try and drag McGregor out, even though McGregor just had a very public stay at home because of coronavirus moment. But then, how much money would it take for you to abandon your principles? Most people, not much. Or we could just end up with a shit tier pay-per-view where the only people there are fighters who desperately need money, and Francis Ngannou and Rosenstruck in the main event. Anyway, I will catch you later in the week. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Cheers!